Today I'm talking about preparedness. And I know that preppers get a lot of people give them a hard time. They tell jokes about them and so on. So I thought I would start off with this. This is a quick little test to see if you're a prepper, okay? You might be a prepper if, when you open your linen closet, a bag of beans falls on your head. If you have more food in your basement than the local grocery store has. You might be a prepper if you have a whole cookbook just about different ways to prepare Spam. You might be a prepper if each of your dogs has its own bug-out bag. You might be a prepper if Costco calls you when they run out of toilet paper. And you could quite possibly be a prepper if you gave your wife a gas mask for your wedding anniversary. Most preppers are not that crazy. My ministry is Christian Financial Concepts. You can find it at christianfinancialconcepts.com. Our calling is educating the body of Christ, primarily on biblical finance, but we do a lot of teaching on the Constitution, the founding of the nation. Christian Financial Concepts does webinars every week, 2 of them every single week. They're free. We have about 500 hours of videos and I don't know how many articles posted on the website, so you can just learn all you want to. It's www.christianfinancialconcepts.com. Just click on videos and you'll see them all there. But that's my regular background. It's not really all that relevant to tonight. So I do have a strong background in emergency services. I was a county civil defense director. I was a disaster services chairman for the Red Cross. I was a county director of emergency medical services. And I served as a firefighter, paramedic, and sheriff's deputy. Now that sounds like a lot, but actually all 3 of those were at the same time. I was a public safety officer. I was a teacher for the National Safety Council. I taught evacuation procedures. Between the Red Cross and the Heart Association, I've taught some 5,000 people CPR. So I've always been involved in volunteer work. I've trained firefighters, police officers, rescue squads, paramedics, EMTs, doctors and nurses. General Boykin was at this conference. He spoke there. I was invited to be one of the speakers at the inaugural conference of the National Security Investment Consultants Institute. And this was a place where the people that were attending were managing at least $500 million, or $500 million, I'm sorry. That was the get-in. You had to be managing $500 million. And the whole idea was, if there is some type of disaster, how will your client's money be protected? And I ended up being very popular because I was the only one that had an answer as far as hard assets. I was telling them how to use precious metals. And most of the other people were talking about different kinds of paper or electronic investing, which, as you know, in a crash could all disappear. That got me interested in this type of thing. Then I was asked to be the keynote speaker to Preparedness Expo. I'd never been to one of those things. I couldn't understand why they were asking me to be a speaker. I really didn't know that much about that sort of thing. But I learned a lot. I was really surprised to find that most of the people at this Preparedness Expo, is the largest in the country, were Christians. Probably 60-70% of them were Christians that were getting themselves ready for different things that might happen. And they asked me to speak about the 10-10 Financial Survival Plan, which I'll be sharing a little bit about tonight. So, is it wrong to prepare? Okay, a lot of Christians don't like the idea because they think it's not faith. They think if you're preparing, then you're worried. And I've said it myself many times, worry is fear, and fear is sin, okay? So if that's the case, then it's a fair question. Is it wrong to prepare for bad things that might happen? Well, let's see what the Bible has to say about it. In Luke, there's the story about counting the cost if you're going to build a tower. In Matthew, the story of the wise and foolish virgins. In Luke, we see that the king is to count the cost and be prepared, know how many people he's coming up against and so on before he goes into battle. That all sounds like preparation to me. Proverbs 6, I love this verse. I don't know why. I think it's the word sluggard. I just like that word, Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. The ants don't have a ruler to tell them what to do, yet they labor all summer gathering food for the winter. So ants were the original preppers, okay? Proverbs 27, a prudent person foresees the danger ahead and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So do I want to be prudent or do I want to be a simpleton? I'll let you decide. 1 Timothy, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, most people take that to mean, well, if you don't work and make a salary, or if you make the money, you go out and gamble it all away, buy lottery tickets or whatever. I call the lottery the tax on the stupid. Florida, where I live, has got us convinced that the money's going to the schools. Only a small percentage of it does. But it's far beyond that. It's taking care of your family's needs for shelter, for food, and for protection. Now, I'm going to probably offend somebody here, but General Boykin offends people all the time, and nobody beats him up. So this is one that Nicholas, our Grand Master of the Knights, quotes a lot. But now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Sell your clothes, be cold, but make sure you have a sword. Wow. If he was saying that today, he'd say, if you don't have a Glock, sell your overcoat and go buy yourself a Glock. Okay? Because that's how we protect ourselves today. A sword is how you protect yourself back then. Now, that doesn't mean you get crazy like some people do. 2 verses down from here, the disciple said to him, well, I have 2 swords. He says, well, that's enough. Okay? So you don't need to buy yourself an AK and 4 shotguns and, 8,000 rounds of ammunition. But you do have a responsibility to protect your family. And there could be situations where there is no police presence, okay, or where the police can't get to you. We've seen that happen in this country. Proverbs 13:6, a wise man thinks ahead, a fool doesn't, and even brags about it. Okay. Ezekiel, be prepared, you and all those assembled around you, you will be the leader. If you are prepared, then you'll also be prepared to be a leader, because as we'll talk about later, we may need leaders. Civil government, as we know it in certain situations, could be temporarily or for a long time suspended. Noah, being warned by God concerning events not yet seen, in reverent fear, okay, good kind of fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. Now look at this. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. Well, why didn't Noah just say, well, the Lord will take care of me. I don't need to have food. I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Well, because God said, take food. Now, where he got the tiger food, I don't know. But he had food on the ark for all the animals. Proverbs 21, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. One of the things that we've done in our family to prepare for situations where there might not be enough food is we eat less. This might sound crazy to you, but there are people in this world that exist on a couple of handfuls of food and are very healthy. What's the difference between them and us? We just go to the bathroom a lot more, okay? Because the vast majority of the 3 large meals a day that we as Americans eat, our body can't use. So it goes in here and goes out there. Don't want to sound gross, but I mean, that's just a fact. Our body can't use all those calories we're pumping into it. They're just wasted. So we've been eating smaller meals, eating less and less. I've lost about 80 pounds since we started doing this, and I've got another 50 to go, but praise God. And I feel just fine. Exodus, the Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold and clothing. So they were preparing. We all know about Joseph. God told him there's going to be feast and then there's going to be famine. Take some of that feast time, put it aside because the famine's coming and you'll be prepared. So we don't do this out of fear, but out of obedience. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but people quote that all the time, but they leave out but of power and of love and of a sound mind. What's a sound mind? It's the mind of Christ, okay? It's being rational and doing what the Word tells us to do. I was talking with Jim Boykin how, one of the examples I use in when I teach financial seminars is a farmer doesn't sit back in his farmhouse and say, Lord, make the crops grow, right? He goes out and he plows and he plants and he takes care of the crop. Then he goes back in the farmhouse and prays for it. So it's the same with anything. If you want to be healthy, you eat right, you exercise. You don't just do all kinds of terrible things to your temple and then ask God to make you a healthy person. You do your part, God will do his part. So it's the same with this. But again, without fear. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be terrified. There'll be great earthquakes and famines and pestilence, but don't be fearful. Don't be terrified because we're children of the King. All right, let's just talk quickly about disasters. The federal government classifies disasters as three main types: natural disasters, man-made disasters, and technological disasters. The scope of these disasters could be small, could be personal, could be a bad accident that you're involved in, a house fire, something like that. It could be local, a blizzard that shuts down your community, flooding. It could be something that affects the whole nation, like a major hurricane. Or it could be an international disaster, like a global caliphate that some people want to get moving. Natural disasters first. Mount St. Helens. People say, oh, well, that was 35 years ago. Well, yeah, it was, but it was also between 2004 and 2008, Mount St. Helens erupted constantly for 4 years. Okay, but just the first time, 500 million tons of ash fell in 11 states. Ash was distributed as far as 2,000 miles away to Oklahoma. It had more power than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. 230 square miles were destroyed. Ash was blowing up 80,000 feet in the air. I left off a zero. There's still active volcanoes all over the United States. Floods. We know about Katrina, Sandy, recently Baton Rouge. How about the flooding in Loxahatchee? Who's ever heard of Loxahatchee? That's where I live. We got two hurricanes, one right after another 11 years ago, and they just stood off the coast and dropped rain and dropped rain and dropped rain, and the ground was completely soaked and the canals were full. And then that hurricane went off, and another one followed 3 weeks exactly later on my wife's and my anniversary, and did the same thing. So I live on an acre and a half, and I have a 1/4 acre pond. For about a month, I had a 1 acre pond and a 1/4 acre house. Okay, fortunately, our house was built up high. We couldn't get in, we couldn't get out. If we didn't have food, we would have been in big trouble. Cell phones didn't work, and so on. And that's in a Palm Beach County, a fairly populated area. Storms, hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, they're actually all three the same. It's just in different parts of the world, they call a hurricane a cyclone or a typhoon. Thunderstorms, lightning, snow, ice, and hailstorms, tornadoes. Sometimes the tornadoes are the worst part of a hurricane. I've been in areas when I was doing rescue work where a hurricane had taken some shingles off here, knocked some trees down over there, and then you see this path going through where there's complete destruction. Houses just completely destroyed, but the house next door was fine. That was a tornado within a hurricane. They can be really, really devastating. Now, I mentioned 11 years ago we had those 2 storms. My wife is a hurricane whisperer, okay? After that second hurricane, she said, you know, my God is bigger than hurricanes. And I'm just tired of this. So from then on, she just started praying hurricanes away. Now what you're looking there is Hurricane Michael a few weeks ago, and you can see it coming right at West Palm Beach. That was projected path as a Category 4 hurricane, next to the most dangerous that there is. It was coming right at us. All the forecasters are saying Palm Beach gets squashed. We didn't even get heavy rains. We didn't have a single branch broken off of one of our trees because my wife, and I'm sure there's some other people as well, just prayed that hurricane out into the ocean. Drought. Drought's not just about not having water. Drought's about not having food because you have to have water for food. Blizzards. People have frozen to death in their cars in blizzards a couple of 100 feet away from help because they didn't know where they were. They couldn't see. Earthquakes, landslides, mudslides come with them, buildings collapse. Remember San Francisco, 2 bridges that were right on top of each other. One of them collapsed on top of the other one and just crushed everybody in between. I'm not trying to be negative or scary here, but basically we have to understand that disasters happen, and most people have this attitude. It's called normalcy bias. Most people think, well, yeah, these things happen, but they won't happen to me. Okay, so they don't prepare for them. Water emergencies. When I was doing my research for this, I came across this thing. Man, I'm going to buy a couple of 100 of these things and give them away as presents. They cost $20 a piece. It's called a water straw. And you can take the thing and stick it in the dirtiest, scummiest pond of water or in a mud puddle and suck water up through it, and it will filter everything out, 99.99% microns, okay? And you can live for a year. It'll filter almost 1,000 gallons of water. So that's what it would take you to live for a year. So that's something everybody should have in their home and in their car. Fire disasters, temperature disasters. We have a very narrow tolerance for temperature. If it gets too hot, if it gets too cold, people start getting in really bad trouble. If you want a Christian viewpoint on this, 2 really good books. One is called The Provident Prepper, and the other, Why Should I Prepare, and Is It Biblical? Okay, man-made disasters, financial disasters. Remember the show 24? That thing was a real ripper, you know. We actually binge watched it. We don't watch that much TV. My wife discovered it and checked out a whole season from the library, and we're just like, we get to the end of one, and they leave you hanging on a cliff. And so then we say, do you want to watch the next one? So we ended up watching 3 of them in a row. But all this amazing stuff happens within 24 hours. It's almost impossible to believe. Well, we had a real 24 in 2008. In 2008, we came within 24 hours of a complete global financial meltdown, and most Americans don't even realize it. It wasn't that there was just a problem. I mean, we're talking about complete financial disaster, banks failing, insurance companies failing, people not accepting your paper money anymore, only gold or silver. I mean, that bad of a financial collapse. And we avoided it, but we're set up right now for another one, and it will probably be worse because we didn't have the one in 2008. The stock market can't go on like it is. It's completely based on smoke and mirrors. All the money that the Fed is printing is propping up the stock market, and it can't go on. But don't forget that in 2008, it wasn't just the stock market that collapsed. The real estate market collapsed as well. The average U.S. retirement account lost between 40 and 50%. And this could happen again. If it does, paper assets will evaporate. Basically, your bank accounts, your annuities, insurance policies, mutual funds, anything that's on paper, anything that's not hard assets. What's a hard asset? Real estate, precious metals. I believe that if you can't hold it, you don't own it. If all you have is a piece of paper saying you own something, think twice. This book, as I mentioned, accurately predicted two years ahead of time everything that happened in 2008. And there's a reason why it became both a Wall Street Journal and a New York Times bestseller. They're saying you need hard assets. Economic terrorism, one of our knights and one of the best teachers on economic terrorism, he's the one that convinced the Pentagon to do war games on economic warfare, because they did everything on conventional, nuclear, chemical, biological. They'd never done war games about what would happen if a country attacked us financially. So get the book, Secret Weapon. Economic warfare has been used for centuries. England used it against, Germany used it against England. They printed up millions and millions of pounds, counterfeit pounds. That's a picture of one of the actual counterfeits. Very hard to tell from the real thing. Brought them in with U-boats to the shore of England and almost completely crushed the England economy with these fake bills. George Soros actually, personally, almost completely crashed the pound by shorting it. It happened around 25 years ago, but this guy he's an evil man. Yeah, he still is. Russia versus the United States. Russia penetrated the NASDAQ. Do you realize that? They broke into the NASDAQ. And if they hadn't been stopped, they could have crashed first the NASDAQ, then the American would have gone, and then the NYSE. China is conducting warfare against us right now as we speak. They're supposedly our ally, our trading partner, but they're manipulating their currency to the detriment of the United States. And there's a lot more to it. I don't have time to go into it. Islamic terrorism. The administration says, oh, don't worry about them. You know, they're the JV. It's not a big deal. We've got the terrorists on the run. Well, the FBI says differently. They said they have active terror investigations ongoing in every one of our states in the United States, even Alaska, okay? They have almost 1,000 ongoing terrorist investigations. And according to one FBI agent, the reason there aren't more is they don't have the manpower to track all the people. There's a lot of suspected terrorists that they can't track. Food emergencies. Every time there's a hurricane or a blizzard warning, whatever, the store shelves get stripped. Why do you think that happens so quickly? The average US city has enough food for 3 days. 3 days. Now, you're not going to starve to death after 3 days, but you're going to get real hungry. You can't live more than 3 days without water. But, you know, I personally have fasted 2 weeks with nothing but water, and I'm still around. We have several accounts in the Bible of fasting for 40 days. That seems to be about the limit, all right? But people are not going to be very happy, and they're going to be doing whatever they have to do to get food. Technological disasters, oil spills. The picture on the left is really pretty, right? But it's not so pretty. That's an oil spill. That creek, that's not its natural color, okay? That's chemicals that have been dumped into the creek. Chemical and biological weapons, they're small, they're easy to sneak into the country, and the prime targets for those are subways and transportation hubs. Nuclear radiation. This is us burying nuclear waste in salt mines. But we're experiencing problems around the country where the nuclear waste is getting into groundwater. There's no real safe way to dispose of nuclear waste. It's just, it lives on. The power grid. The US power grid has already been successfully penetrated. Now, they can't prove who did it. Russia, China, Islamist. We don't know, but it has been penetrated. And the way the power grid is set up is that if there's a bad one, like we had about 20 years ago in New York, most of the Northeast went dark, okay? It's a domino effect because the power grids are interconnected so that if one goes down, the ones around it can supply power to it. Well, that's a good thing, but if enough of them go down, that interconnectedness can cause a complete crash. We as a nation are addicted to electricity. We've forgotten how to live without it. Most people can't live without electricity. And that's a scary thought because you may be without it. I've been without it for weeks with hurricanes. And so we had to learn how to get along without electricity. The internet, it controls everything. Every day, the internet becomes more powerful. Commerce, banking, communications, our supplies. Even if there's oil and food to be brought into a city, without the internet, they don't know where to take it, okay? Even big parts of our national defense are dependent on the internet. Did anyone notice last Friday about a quarter of the United States lost internet connectivity? Well, a Chinese firm has admitted that cameras and DVRs that they made had been hacked, and so they're not claiming responsibility for it. They're saying, well, somebody else used our stuff to get into it. And it may be true, I don't know, but it was what's called a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, where so many people try to hit a website that it's just, there's no bandwidth to handle it, and it goes down. EMPs and solar storms. The effect of an EMP attack, which is a deliberate explosion of a nuclear device, not to kill people, not to get radiation on you, but to fry all the electronics in the affected area. The effect of that and of a solar storm are pretty much the same thing. So there's a natural EMP attack, but basically traffic would stop because unless you've got a real old car, everything in your car is electronic, so it just stops. Airplanes don't fly, cell towers go down, banking stops. Nothing electronic works in an area that's been hit by an EMP attack. In 1859, a solar storm affected the United States. Now back then we didn't have much electronics. Basically we had telegraph, and almost all of the telegraph equipment in the United States stopped working. In 2012 there was another solar storm, but fortunately it didn't come close enough to the Earth to have the effect of 1859. If it had, it would have been the same as if coordinated EMP attacks took place all around the world at the same time. Now, we don't know what's on them, but North Korea has 2 satellites that overfly the United States every single day. Again, we don't know what's on them, but if they have nuclear devices in them and they decided to explode them, you know, North Korea could not attack us in the conventional way, but they could in that way. And this is not just crazy stuff that people talk about. Here's the Congress of the United States investigating the EMP threat, our state of preparedness as a nation against the threat of an electromagnetic pulse. Here's a diagram. This is testimony in Congress of a burst at 30 feet. It would have a radius of 480 miles. A burst at 120 miles up would be a 1,000-mile radius, and a burst at 300 miles up would affect the entire United States. So these are the things that would go down: people's pacemakers, gas pumps, and so on. The good news, you ready for some good news? The good news is that sensible preparation for all of these things is pretty much the same, okay? Now, these are some extreme preppers. I mean, these guys have enough food and water purification equipment and everything to last them for 10 years. Here's the other extreme. But here's just some basic things. And the reason I gave you the handout is because I don't have time to go through all of them. But I gave you a checklist for 2 different types of bug out bags. One that you should have ready for medical and survival type things. The other for business and personal things. Again, because we live in a hurricane prone area, we always have a backpack packed, have had for years. Like I would hate for us to lose our wedding pictures, things like your birth certificate. If you have a concealed carry permit, you should have that with you, because otherwise the police or the military in a disaster could take away your weapon from you. But think about this, guys. How many times a day do you hit a light switch? And what if the light switch doesn't work? Or flushing a toilet, turning on a water faucet, heating and cooling. I mean, it was great listening to Lance. But what if the air conditioning wasn't working and there's no windows? How many of you would have stayed in here if it was 90 degrees inside this room? You know, we're so used to having all these creature comforts. Cell service, no matter what, hey, we just pick up the telephone. We need information, look at it on the internet. You need how to get someplace, use your GPS. But what if those things aren't working? So you need to plan on no tech, okay? I know Christians that don't own a Bible because they've got their tablet or they got their cell phone. Well, make sure you got a Bible, all right? Make sure you have maps because GPS might not work. Make sure you got a good pair of shoes or boots if your car doesn't work. Don't fail me now, you know. Candles, a thing like a can opener. We're so used to the little bzzz, electric can opener. What if you have a lot of food and can't open the can? You have to think about these things ahead of time. All the people advise us to have 3 days worth of food and water. To me, that is woefully inadequate. You need a lot more than that. Water, you can't live without it. The recommendation is having 1 gallon a day of water per person. And you need another gallon a day that doesn't necessarily have to be pure water that you'd use for sanitation purposes, you know, bathing and so on. But be careful with the kind of filtration and purification equipment that you get, because so much of it depends on technology and you might not have it. Food, obviously non-perishable food. I've done a lot of research on this. Freeze-dried food is the best. It has like a 25-year shelf life. Learn what kinds of foods in your area are safe to eat. I love berries. We have a thing called Florida holly, and the berries look delicious, but they're poisonous, okay? Seeds, make sure you have seeds, but make sure that they're real seeds, okay? Because some of the seeds are designed, they're genetically engineered to where they can't reproduce. So you can grow something with it, but then the seeds from that, you can't grow something with it. So you want to get heirloom seeds. Tools, if there's an earthquake or a mudslide or something like that, a wrench to turn off the gas valve would be a handy thing. An axe or a hatchet to chop wood. Knives for a variety of reasons. A shovel for sanitation. We don't have tools. Most homes don't have tools. Something goes wrong, they call the handyman. As far as I'm concerned, you can't have too many tools. And don't forget things like disinfectants, bleach, plastic bags to dispose of waste. Duct tape will be worth its weight in gold, okay? Duct tape you can use for fixing things, for sealing things, for splinting broken bones. I mean, toilet paper, we don't have that many catalogs these days, so make sure that you have a radio that will work without electricity. They have hand-cranked radios, also hand-cranked flashlights, things like that. They're not very expensive, but if something goes down, they'll be extremely expensive. Make sure you've got money, because the stuff that you don't have, you want to be able to buy. You want to have junk silver, that's in the bottom right there, dimes, quarters, pre-1965, when our money actually had silver in it. Some small denomination bills, Gold coins, the coins you see there are just inexpensive British sovereigns. During World War II, every British fighter pilot was given an emergency kit. Had a 45 in it, with ammunition, of course. They didn't have granola bars back then, so they gave them chocolate bars for quick energy. And they were given 5 sovereigns, which are small, about quarter-ounce coins, that they could use to try and buy their way out of captivity if civilians caught them, instead of turning them over to the Germans. A medical kit, this looks kind of scary, but again, you just have to be practical. You may need sutures, which means you need to know how to suture. Basically, suturing is just like sewing, but it can make the difference between whether somebody lives or dies. An important part of your medical kit is a book like this. This is written by a medical doctor, and basically it's what to do if 911 doesn't answer, okay? I've been in situations like this where we had flooding and we couldn't, I was a paramedic, I couldn't take my ambulance to people's homes. We had to wait till the floodwaters went down, and then we took the big fire trucks, the ones that were like the brush trucks that were very high off the ground. We would go and do what we could for people in their homes, and then if we had to transport them, we put them in a Stokes basket and stick them up on the hose bed. So you can't always depend on 911 answering. Bug out bags, that's the handout I gave you. The suggested items to take with you in a bug out bag. Okay, if bad things happen, this doesn't mean that the world is coming to an end, all right? And this is my main point I want to get across. God is our refuge and strength. He's a very present help in time of trouble. Therefore, we won't fear. We need to make sensible preparations. I know I'm the one that, when we have these things, I'm the one that talks about the crazy stuff. Like last year I was talking about why nations prosper and other nations fail. And I didn't know that I'd be talking about preparedness until the Lord put it on my heart. But He gave me the title first, and that's the ultimate preparedness. We talked about ways that you can prepare in the natural, but can you ever actually be prepared enough? No. There's no way that you can have in the natural all the preparations you need. So does that mean that we shouldn't prepare? No, because of the Bible verses that we quoted earlier. We should. But ultimately, it's God's going to take care of us. There's this mentality in this country that the government's going to take care of you. No matter what happens, the government's going to take care of me. Well, I have 3 questions for people. The first is, will the government take care of us? I have a feeling that a lot of the politicians are going to be taking care of their own family and their own house and so on. And they're not going to be too worried about you. But even if they wanted to, can the government take care of us? FEMA has these trailers positioned all over the country with food and water and so on like that. But they would only take care of a tiny fraction of the people in the country. It's all predicated on isolated disaster situations. A massive disaster, there's no way the government can take care of us. So maybe the government can, because who is the government? We are, okay? So if there's a disaster situation, then if we as a community come together and take care of each other, take care of the elderly people, take care of kids if their parents have been hurt, share what we have, we become the government again the way it's meant to be. And we take care of protecting one another, policing. If there's a fire, we put them out the way we used to do before there were fire departments. The people get together and put out the fires. We all know this verse. I love it. God has good plans for us. But no matter how well we plan, I used to, when I pastored my first church, I owned a construction company. And this was the verse that was on my business cards. I didn't care if people said, well, if you're a crazy Christian, I'm not going to let you build my house. Because this was what my business was built on. Unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain who build it. And unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. So ultimately, it's up to God. I mean, If I have food stored up for 4 years and something lasts for 5 years, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I believe the Lord can say, Tom, go down this road, turn right, and what looks like an abandoned warehouse is full of food. Go down there, get the food, share it with people. Or the Lord could send us manna, like he did for the children of Israel. So after hearing this, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? I think you should go home and talk to your family, if you haven't already done this. I think every family needs a disaster plan. How are we going to handle it? If we're separated, if you're off at school, if you're off at work, what's our rallying point? Where are we going to get together? Are you going to make personal preparations? Are you going to share with your church and warn them? I mean, like Lance was saying, Christians like happy talk. You know, we don't want to hear about bad things, but the church should have a disaster plan. And think about the fact that a disaster could be a wonderful opportunity for outreach. Edward is a chaplain. He runs toward disasters. You know, like I used to when I was a fireman, we run into burning houses. Jim Boykin, when they had shooting, everybody else I'm sure was running the other way. He was running toward it. So this is a huge opportunity for us to show the love of Christ in our communities.